Okay.
Okay. So first, let's take a look at the handouts that are from the slides. So let's start with quantitative data analysis, just to get the ball rolling. So whether we're talking about data, quantitative or qualitative data, data analysis is the process of deriving meaning from what you've observed during the research process, and also that you're looking for patterns. So you're looking for those patterns no matter what kind of analysis you're doing. It's just that whether you're using numbers or words or images, that you're going to be able to you're going to be engaging in different steps or processes in order to get at those patterns. So one of the first things to keep in mind about quantitative data analysis is that it depends on the level of measurement, what kind of variable that you're using. That tells you what kind of analyses that you're going to be able to do. So there are different levels of measurement. Nominal, where a category has names or labels. So like ID number or age or whatever. There's ordinal, and these can be rank ordered. So if you're asking, say, someone for like how many years of education they have, and it's ordinal, and it goes in order. An interval has equal intervals between the categories. So if you have like 1 to 4, and then you have 5 to 9, like the category, each of the categories has the same space in between them. Those are intervals, and then there's ratio, and that's a category that has an absolute 0 point. Most of you all who are doing surveys, who are asking questions on a rating scale, like from strong to, like, how do you feel about this, very strong or very weak, or very, I agree, very strongly disagree, you're doing an ordinal measurement, because you're looking at like a degree of something, agreement, liking, disliking, or whatever. So that means that there are certain kinds of statistical analyses you're going to be able to do, and certain ones that you can't. That's really all that means, and that's the reason why we're going over it. So next is, there are different ways of distributing your data, and most of the analyses that stats analyses assume that you have what's called a symmetrical or normal distribution of data, which means that you have some things that are at one extreme. Some of your participants, some of your responses are going to be at one extreme, some are going to be at the other, but most of them are going to be in the middle. And so you see some differences. The first one is the symmetrical, which is also called a normal, as it shows on the left. Then there are asymmetrical with a positive skew, where you have more answers that are sort of on the lower end of things, and then low values, and then you have a negative skew, where they would be high values. You want to have normal distribution. What you all want to know, if you're, say, for instance, Talia, looking at the different kinds of models that people use, is, are they skewed? Like, is everybody kind of using one model? The models, it's not so much ordinal. It's not like there's a ranking for each of the models, but it would be interesting and important for you to know before you even sort of get deep, is to figure out, like, is there one or are there two that everybody's using and everybody else is not using the other ones, because then you can just eliminate those from any analyses that you do, right? So it's more about just sort of informing about your data when you do these preliminary
can you repeat that?
checking.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that, please?
Which one?
The last part about using certain types of models that people in your field are using.
Her specific example. Right. So she is.
I found models for language acquisition,
okay.
And so like I put them down, but so when I immediately get my data back, it'd be like interesting to know. Like I probably will not have a normal distribution. It'll probably be more of a skew, like a. It's not negative or positive.
It won't be negative or positive, right?
Just like
because they're not
skew toward one. Like if you put it in like a box and whisker plot, like one would be like really towards like the PEC system with or without video modeling. So, like, I'll have a skew. So, when I focus on my discussion, like, in the discussion portion, I'll probably focus on, like, why are people using this method? Why are other people not? And, like, why are the other methods not as well known? Is it because teachers aren't reading about things? Are they not? Like, like with data I have, I can hypothesize on why people use one and not the other.
That's just such a great way to describe it, and it might even be something that has to do with New York State. Like maybe in New York, this is the model, the PECS is really what's emphasized, and you might say in your study, in your discussion, like you're saying, you know, one of the reasons why this may be the most commonly used is because in New York State, it's the one that's promoted the most. If this study were replicated in Texas, we may get some different findings, whatever, right? But it's exactly right. You're looking for sort of what can you tell by where the data are concentrating, or, you know, whether or not, like, if her data, if her variable was ordinal, like, say, one of the questions that you have, Brittany, is it like, do the kids feel like they're concentrating like better or worse, or, right? Like, very focused to non-focused, right? Let's just say.
My rating scale?
Your rating scale. So let's just say, for like loosely speaking, that there's from, you know, totally unfocused to highly focused.
Yeah, like not at all, just a little bit, quite a bit, very much.
If every single one of her participants answered not at all, or, you know, a whole lot, that would mean that her data are not normally distributed. So there's something there that says, this isn't giving me sort of like a picture of kind of average situation. It's giving me an average of like kids who are really having issues in this direction, or really not having issues. And you see what I mean? So you want to look at, before you sort of take next steps, is like, where are the data just distributed? How are they? Are all of my answers going in one direction or another? So that can tell you whether or not you've got sort of a problem. Most of the time, data skewness is seen as a problem. Sometimes it's explainable, and if the variables are not ordinal, that makes a lot of sense. If they're ordinal, it does mean that maybe you didn't sample widely enough, you didn't sample, you weren't systematic or random in your sampling, and obviously with your small sample size, you know, it's not going to be the end of the world. And if all the teachers kind of tend to answer the same way, or all the parents and whatever, we'll just work around it. But I'm just saying, like, in principle, you want to have kind of as much of like stuff in the middle, and then as little as possible on the tail ends, because then you know that you're dealing with a normal population or a normal distribution. Does that make sense? Okay. So the next series of slides are just some examples of how you can display your data with frequencies if you're trying to just get a visual on it. So you can use a simple frequency distribution where every single one of your values gets a little bar. And this is a bar chart that you can easily create in Excel, all of these. So you can have it where you have every single like number of study hours per week. And every single answer that you get, you know, you have this looks like there's a sample of 30 participants, because the graph is going from 1 to 30. There are 30 bars, and so for each answer, you write down, you record it. So imagine if you had 700 participants, right? You couldn't possibly present it that way. So instead, you use a grouped frequency distribution where the number of study hours a week are like, you know, between this and this, it's this many, and so you help to make it a little bit less cumbersome that way.
So with my rating scale, how I have like not at all, just a little bit, quite a bit, very much, and I'm doing that, basically I have 4 rating scales. How would I present that? Could I do it that same way?
You could do it the same way. It would depend on. So, are you trying to
individual charts?
Are you trying to? Well, so that depends on what question you're trying to answer. Are you trying to get, for each of the rating scales, do you want to know what the frequency is? If so, then yes, you would just do one of these for each one.
Okay.
If you that might end up in your final report. It may not. But for yourself, I would say, yeah, sure, go ahead and just see how it looks and see whether there's anything that's sort of standing out. Like, you know, if you look at this first frequency table, the top one, the simple frequency distribution, you'll see that this one participant was studying for 16 hours a week, and that was way more than everyone else. So that's someone who's going to sort of throw off your numbers, so it's good to do these kinds of things. Yeah. So for you, I would do each one separate for each scale and just see kind of where are the data sort of aggregating.
What about using like one of those, the double bar graphs, where it's like participant 1 is in blue and participant 2 is in red, and that way you can like look at the graph and then compare them visually. Like in the first, you know, before, this is how the two of them looked, and then after, this is how the two of them looked.
Okay. That makes sense.
So yeah, bar graphs is next. There are different kinds of graphical displays: bar graphs, histograms, and pie charts. A bar graph is just, just like similar to the frequency, but notice the difference. Notice how the frequency distribution, all the bars are next to each other. And then the bar graph, they're separate from each other. That's not an insignificant, that's not just random. That's because in the frequency distribution, you really are looking at the raw data and how they are distributing across. Like, you're literally just plugging in raw numbers, whereas the bar graph is more of a summary of what it is that you're finding. So then you're going to have some distance between them because you don't want anybody to think that there's like a relationship per se. A histogram is a similar thing to a bar graph. It's best for interval or ratio level variables, whereas bar graphs are better for nominal and ordinal variables. And then pie charts are the best for when you're looking at a whole and you're looking at how a whole amount is divided. Like, the bar graph could be an hour if you're looking at how kids are spending their time in an hour. The big circle could be 1 hour, and you could look at each slice of like how they're spending time in each slice, which might be an interesting thing to do if you're doing observation. It could also be like proportion of students at the school who are from a language background or who have special needs, whatever the issue is. And then I just realized that the frequency polygon is just showing frequencies, so that you have just another graphic, just another way of visualizing the data.
Is that the histogram?
No, this one that has
the frequency.
Yeah, the frequency polygon. It's just a data point. It just shows the points. It's just a different way of showing like sort of midpoints within each of the things and how the data are falling. So here it's a normal distribution, so it doesn't look very special, but it could be really different. It could look really different. So this is just you getting to know your data, right? Because this is just like one variable at a time. Now, if you want to know about relationships between two variables, that's a totally different matter, okay? So here we are, page 6, the contingency tables. Bivariate analyses are the ones that help you describe the relationship between two variables. So is there a relationship between like number of years a teacher has taught and the student's attention, ability to maintain attention for a really long time? Or is there a relationship for you between like number of years that kids have spent in the US versus their level of proficiency in the language? Sometimes you actually really do want to look at the relationship between two variables. Now that you may be able to do that in Excel, but I do not know how to do that. I do that in SPSS. I use the statistical package when I'm going to look at relationships. Also, I have to say though, Qualtrics will do something that's called a cross-tabulation. The cross-tabulation literally tells you the co-occurrence of one variable with another. So whether the variable is like years in the US and you have different categories for that, so the variables might be like 0 to 2 years, 3 to 6 years, so you have these categories, and then you might have like level of proficiency, high, medium, low. A crosstab will tell you the relationship between those two, like literally where they meet, and how many people you have who have 0 to 3 who have this many years, how many people who have 3 to 6 who have that many, or who have this level of proficiency or that level of proficiency. Do you see what I'm saying? Qualtrics will do that. Qualtrics has that capability, and it may have other sort of those are considered very simple kind of bivariate relationships, and I think Qualtrics can do kind of simple bivariate. But multivariate relationships are where you have at least 3 variables that you're interested in. So you're trying to understand like a more complex relationship, and that you will definitely need to have a statistical package for, and this is where your advisor will have to step in. If you need that level of analysis, your advisor is going to have to step in and work with you on that. Okay.
You can also get it on the virtual computer lab. Like, we have access to it.
Oh, wonderful.
On NYU Home. It's like under, I think it's NYU Life. I don't remember exactly which tab it's under, but there's like a virtual computer lab, and you can click on it, and SPSS is in there.
Fantastic. That's really great to know.
We get a lot of stuff for our money. We
Yeah.
do. We get like a lot of stuff.
That's
you just
great.
have to like know where to look.
Yeah, no one
Right,
knows
because you
about
don't
it,
always
though.
know. I just
Nobody really knows about it though.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, so your advisor, should be able to help you, but also at the library,
Yeah.
they have
The
really great
best
informational
library.
sessions on like how to do basic SPSS. They even have, and there are qualitative data analysis packages, so people sometimes use software to do their qualitative data analysis as well. I tend to be a little bit more like old-fashioned, where I use paper, but like I was doing a collaborative project with a colleague. One of them was in Maryland, the other one was pregnant and mostly working from home in New Jersey, and there was me, so we actually did use a package, and it was at NYU. Well, no, that one wasn't, but anyway, NYU does have those things, and they have training, and so you can go and learn how to use these things, so it's fine. So anyway, so this is just sort of going into details that we don't really need to necessarily get into unless you are actually going to do this, and you should look at this more closely as well as the FLIC chapter if you are using quantitative data, and your advisor should be able to guide you in that process, and then you can also get support at the library. So I just wanted to show you guys a survey that I have distributed that is, it's actually demographic. So it's not like fancy, quantitative information, but it is quantitative information because I'm turning it into numbers. And so first you get the interview, and then you're going to get the code book, and you'll see that. So the reason why I create code books is because I have students who work with me, right? And so we're a team, and people are doing coding, different people are doing coding, so I always have a code book. So the code book looks a lot like the interview, and it just gives instructions for how the data should be recorded, and then I'm also going to give you this here.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Do you think it's better? So I have a survey. Do you think it's better to put like a category and then a line, or to have like checkboxes? Which do you think is better?
Well, if it's an open-ended, you would want to have a line, but if it's like yes, no, you'd want to have a checkbox.
So like things like. Okay, never mind. Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's up to you, really. I mean,
Because I feel like a lot of the mine looks big only because there's so many checkboxes, and I'm thinking maybe I should just do lines, because if I give a student like a 3-page survey, they're just gonna kind of chuck it at me. Like
Unless they
Not
get
literally.
unless they get out of class, because then they will do the world for you.
but design matters, visuals matter, and so if it looks clunky to you, then it probably will look clunky to them. So then, yeah, there's no rule. It's just more like you look at it. If you don't like it, change it.
Because what I did was I tried taking the questions and like how they have like never, often, whatever, and I made it into a table, so it's like question, and then the categories are here, and you just check whichever one. I thought it'd make it simpler, but I don't know anymore.
Yeah, you just have to kind of look and see,
Try to fix that.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to look and see like maybe some other examples that you could, use. Because did you use Qualtrics to create it, or?
No, I started with the Google. Google has a survey thing. I forgot what it's called. Like forms. Yeah. I started with that, and then I just did it on Word because it was easiest for me. But I'm gonna try it on Qualtrics.
Or you could use it in Google Forms, but all I'm saying is like they have standardized formats, so sometimes it's like if you're just trying to create it out of your own head, it's a little bit like you're just literally you don't know where to go. But if you use something like Forms or something that give you guidance, then you can literally just like, oh, I like this is prettier to me than that one, as opposed to like having to kind of come up with it on your own.
Yeah, because they told me to search up samples and like different ways of measures, and I kind of took what I saw and tried to combine it. That's where I got the idea of putting it in a table, and that's where I got a lot of the questions and the categories from, because those are things that they used. But it doesn't, like, it looks like it's too hefty. Like, I feel like it's
If you feel that way, then your participants are going to feel that way.
okay.
Definitely.
But then I asked them.
So, I'm sorry. My questionnaire is both has some quantitative questions, so like check here, check there, but then also some qualitative aspects
Right.
for,
So does
for the
this
open-ended
one.
questions. Okay, good, because I want I couldn't get. I really don't know if I just read too quickly or I didn't get it. What's the point of a code book? Like, why do you?
So the point of a code book is so that you can have a numerical attachment to your data. So if you'll notice, okay, look at the interview. I asked them not to code name. But if you look at question number 2, which is sex, please circle female or male. If you look at the code book, for sex, for the coders, if it's a female, they're going to put a 0 in the spreadsheet. They're going to put a 0 in that, and if it's a male, they're going to put a 1. Which then allows me to just ask very quickly, say if I'm using Excel, for instance, how many zeros do I have and how many ones? And what is the mean, what's my average, what's the percentage of zeros versus ones, right? So that's why you convert it. You convert it so that you can easily summarize it. Country of birth, or like, okay, age. So I have age in the questionnaire. I just have age, okay? For the code book, I also have the blank for age, which is my raw number, but then I also have categories, because I may be more interested, depending on the study that I'm doing, I may be more interested in representing the raw numbers and saying, like, this was the range of ages, meaning the youngest person to the oldest person. All of my teachers were between the ages of 22 and 48. Or I may be interested in this more summarized version where I'm asking my coders to convert whatever the age is filled in at on the blank on number 3 to pick 1, 2, 3, or 4, and then in the code book it's going to go 1, 2, 3, or 4. Okay, and then I can say what's the average, what percentage of my sample may have fit into this age category, right? So that just allows me, again, it's just translating. It's all about translating the stuff to make it more manageable. Data analysis is a lot about data management, and creating a code book is about data management, right? Okay.
I have to go to my class.
Okay.
Can I like probably meet with you after spring break?
Definitely.
I mean, I'm going to go over it myself.
So
Sarah.
these variables, this Excel spreadsheet is one that I just created. Like, I just went into Excel and I looked at my questionnaire, at literally my questions, and I just named the different variables. Like question number 1, instead of the person's name, I want their ID, because I don't want to use their name because that would not be kosher. So I want to know for question 2 sex, so I name that variable sex. I name variable 3 age. I name variable 4 COB. It's just a summarize, but it's country of birth. It's literally going down the list of questions, but it's doing it this way. And then it allows me for each of the participants to enter the code book, then allows me to translate whatever their answers are into something.
Can I take the interview one? Or like
Oh,
the-
yeah. Here. So this is coding. Oh, yeah. So this is 2 examples of qualitative data. Interview, field notes.
Cool.
And you can apply the instructions from
Yeah,
this to both.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And the spreadsheet, we're doing that on Excel.
So you can do it in Excel or in SPSS, depending on what level of sophistication that you need. I did it in Excel for this particular study because all I needed was demographics. I just needed, like, what's the average age of my participants, what's the average number of years that they taught in the schools, what's the, just more like means and that kind of thing. Nothing sophisticated. I didn't need any cross tabulations. I didn't need to know how many people who had been teaching for 5 years also felt strongly that teaching was a great thing, right? Like, if I wanted that level of questioning, I would have used SPSS.
I'm sorry, because I'm just trying to understand. So, like, for me, it's level of student engagement and, totally spacing out my question. Levels of student engagement and how that impacts them in the class. That makes sense because I'm slowly spacing out. But, so I would be using something to find a relationship between how engaged they are and how well they're doing, right?
Right, but you're not looking at impact because you're not doing a causal study.
Yeah,
Because you're not doing longitudinal study.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You're looking at the relationship.
Yeah.
You're looking at a correlation.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Sorry.
So for correlations, that's okay. Correlations, you do want to use SPSS.
Okay.
I think there's a way to do it in Excel. I really do. I just don't know it personally. So I'd rather steer you in a direction that I'm like sure and certain, rather than have you do sort of all the work in Excel and then find out. Although it's easy to import, honestly. It's like you can just tell it to export an Excel file into SPSS and it'll just format it right. It's like beautiful. But just because I wouldn't feel comfortable I can't assert that you can do that in Excel. I'm not going to say that you can. So you see how like I'm converting all of the options, right, from the interview, converting them into numerical data in the code book, and then that's what is going into my nice little table, and then I can do my analyses. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you only printed us the answers of.
I only did like the first 5 pages because this is like a 9-page document, and I only did the first few pages of it. Now, at the end of this interview, you'll see that I have open-ended questions, which is exactly what Talia was asking about. So, number 6. My code book actually does not go into that section. That's because what I wanted to do for the open-ended questions was qualitative analysis. However, there is a way to the same way that I created codes for the demographic data, I could also create codes for open-ended information, okay? So, for example, when we did the research with the Haitian youth, the immigrant youth in Boston, we did open-ended questions where we asked the students, like, let me think of one.
Did you ask them to write things down, or did you find it
No,
easier to like
we
have them just tell it to you and then you wrote?
Yeah, we wrote it down.
That makes. I mean, I feel like that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So, okay, one of the questions that we asked them open-ended was, what do you remember about your home country? Tell me some of the things that you remember about your home country. So, we had kids who talked about like nature and trees, and they talked about, their relatives, or they talked about their friends. They talked about the kinds of things that they did, their favorite places, like a whole range of answers, right? And because we weren't necessarily interested in, for that, okay, we were not interested per se in thematically analyzing all of the different things that kids said about what they remember. We were more interested in categorizing, okay? So then we created codes that once we read enough interviews and felt like we had a good sense of the kinds of responses the kids were giving, we created codes. So code number 1 was remembers things about people, or remembers people, remembers places, remembers nature, remembers violence, right? Okay, so then we created categories. Number 1 was remembers people, number 2 was whatever. And then that number now goes into that little chart. And then, it's like, so somebody who looks at that, it means nothing to them, but it means something to you, because based on your code book, that 1 is equivalent to remembers people. And then you can see how many kids remember people, because you're not necessarily interested in the kind of more in-depth analysis of like, what do they say about the people they remember, and like, you know what I mean? So there is a way with your open-ended questions to condense them and transform them into numbers. Or there's what we'll talk about with thematic analysis, which is different. So there are 2 different things that you can do with word data. You can turn it into a number, or you can analyze the words. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, this is probably a stupid question, but like, if you can put more than one code for the qualitative part, right? Because like if a child is talking about people, but also
yes, absolutely, right.
It works that way.
It does work that way. What we do when we and sometimes we care that they have more than one answer, and sometimes we don't.
Okay.
When we care, we create more than one column for each. So like remembers. So let's say we create the name of that variable. To we usually make like sort of condensed names. So say the name of that variable is COMEM, country of origin memory. Okay, COMEM. So we would have COMEM1, depending on how many possible answers we were interested to know. If they said more than one thing, we might have different columns: COMEM1, COMEM2, COMEM3. We'll just pick the top 3. Any kid who said more than 3, we don't care. Okay. If we want to know all of them, then we would have as many as sort of sky's the limit. But at some point you have to make a decision. And so especially when you're converting qualitative data into quantitative categories, the point is to be more condensed. And so you do want to set sort of like stricter limits. Okay. Mm-hmm. And another thing that sort of helps you make that decision is like most kids are not going to say 5 things. Mm-hmm. So you create your cutoff based on your knowledge of what you're seeing. So you want to have an initial sort of feel anyway, because you you don't want to create codes, especially not with converting qualitative codes into quantitative ones. You don't want to create those without reading the data first. You have to look at what you've got, and then you can be like, okay, so yeah, there was the 2 talkative kids who listed 6 things, but all 68 other kids only listed 2 things. So we'll go ahead and create a 3rd category, like just as a buffer for the in between kids, but we know that we're going to capture most of the information with these 3 if we just have 3. Okay? Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
I'm already thinking about like if I'm gonna like mix, like have code and like have a code book and then also have like thematic.
Yeah. So maybe you'll decide when we look at the thematic. So I just wanted to show you then how you would transform the data into something visual. Okay, so this is just a table that is a table for how you would represent the information. So I just made the like demographic characteristics, which is what you guys have, right? The questionnaire that you have, it's exactly the same thing that you have in the chart. It's just that those are the wrong numbers. And then you see that the 2 categories that I had was median and age. So the median age for the participants and the age range. So the age range was 28 to 55, but the median, which is the most frequent number, was 40. That's what median means. Mean means average, so it would be like 28, you would add up all the numbers and then do a mean, do the average. Excel can do that very easily. The median is just the most frequent one. So then, or it's that's the midpoint. Sorry, you line up all the numbers and you pick the midpoint. So if you have 8 people, you write down all the 8 ages and whatever number's in the middle, that's your median.
Well, if it's 8, it would be the average of the
2 in the middle. Right. But you don't have to actually do that. Your computer can do that for you. So then I would want to know, sort of like country of birth, mother's country of birth, father's country of birth, the age at migration, racial, ethnic background, all these things that I decided to list for my demographic characteristics, which I would then use the data to help fill in. And the only reason why I call this before and the other one after is because this is the prettier version. So when you're writing a paper, when you're presenting your data in a paper, you're going to want your table to look like this and not like this. Because this has all the grid lines and it just looks like a chart. Whereas this is a nice streamlined paper. And just look at the next one. So it's it doesn't have lines all over it. It just looks more professional. And this is how.
How do you get it like that?
API. You in Word, you can actually tell it like where to put grid lines or where to put lines and where to remove lines and so on. They also have in Word, they have sort of preset designs, so you can like enter it at first like this, right? Just create a regular old table, and then you can do the table format or table design. I forget what it's called now because it's like different versions of Word. And then it'll show you different ones, and you can actually like try different ones out. Like, oh, maybe I want to have like a gray box at the top, and then like whatever at the bottom. Maybe I want to have thick line. All these different possibilities. For displaying a table, a demographic table of information. So now you know about displays that are like bar graphs and charts, and you know about displays that are tables.
With bar graphs, do we still have to find like the median and range? Is it all that?
Well, it just depends on what it is that you're trying to represent. You can do a bar graph. Like I could have done age range in a bar graph. I could have had all the ages, and then I would just have like a big peak where the, the mean age, right. Or So I could, it's with data display, with, sort of graphic displays of data, you just want to present what makes the most sense in order for people to understand what it is that's going on. It's probably not like if you were to present. The reason why people use tables to do demographics is because it allows you to condense a whole lot of data into one spot. If you had to create a bar graph for age and then another one for country, you would have like 25, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, however many ones I have here, you would have a bar graph for each one. No one wants to see that, and you don't want to do that. But here, it just gives you like a condensed, boom, here I have a visual of like who these people are.
Did you insert that into your paper, or did you put it as an appendix?
It is in my paper, so the APA 6, and actually apparently it's been since APA 5. It used to, the old way used to say you're supposed to put a little bracket in your paper that says insert table 1 about here, and then you put it at the end. You don't even call it an appendix, you just literally paste it at the end of your article or your paper. But now they want you to actually go ahead and put it in, because the way that typesetting has changed with publishers is they're able to handle it. Like they can just kind of pick up your table and move it. It used to be that they wanted you to put it at the end because it would mess up their typesetting and whatever. So anyway, we've now advanced modern times. You guys would just put your tables, your whatever, like graphs or charts or whatever you have, you would just literally put it exactly where.
But the questionnaires that we have are at the end.
Yes, that's an appendix, exactly. Okay. Questionnaires and anything other, any other kind of supplementary stuff is.
Oh, so like the surveys and stuff that we use, that document has to be in the end of our.
Yes, as an appendix. And you would just, refer to it. Like in the body of your paper, you would say, teachers, parents were asked to complete the CBCL, and then you would say in parentheses, like, see Appendix C, and then it would just be there.
Okay.
Or a modified version of it, and you would show your modified version of it in your case. So, okay, so is that okay for the people who are doing surveys, feeling like you have a sense of like how you might work with your data? And it's case by case, so I can't tell you exactly, but hopefully this gives you enough of a sense of things so that when you go to meet with your advisor, you're an informed consumer, or informed, right? So then it can be like a more of an, where it's not just your advisor telling you what to do, but where you're like, okay, so here is what I'm seeing in my data, and I think that it would make sense to do a pie chart, or I think that, you see what I mean? Okay, so that's that. Now let's look at the qualitative data. So here is this exercise that I've used in the past that we're not necessarily going to walk through, but it is something that you can do. So let's also look at the little handout on qualitative data analysis. Right, so the goals of qualitative data analysis, again, all data analysis is about like data reduction and trying to look for themes and patterns, but in qualitative data, we're not necessarily interested in generalization and abstraction. We really just want to understand. We're just trying to understand people, groups, and organizations in their context, and we're less interested in generalizing, and we use inductive rather than deductive reasoning. So the process comes from the data themselves rather than us sort of imposing things on it. Are there steps in qualitative data analysis? They're not really set. So in quantitative analysis, you have some sort of pretty set things that you're supposed to do. You would first do your analysis of your distribution, right? Are my data normally distributed? Are there problems with my data? Are there errors? Is there anything that's throwing them off? And then like first you would do descriptive statistics where you're just looking at means and averages and whatever. And then you're kind of getting more sophisticated like with each step. In qualitative data analysis, it's not so much of that because the data collection, the data analysis and drawing conclusions are usually happening at the same time. So when you are observing, for instance, Brittany, you're observing the kids, even though you are focused on observing, you would not be a human being if you also weren't thinking like, oh, that's interesting because that reminds me of this other thing that I saw. Or last week, he didn't do this. He was more like that, right? And so that is part of the analysis process because you're already beginning to try to make connections. That's what data analysis is, like making the connections, figuring out what is going on. When you are, because qualitative analysis, or because qualitative data usually like the researcher is an instrument as much as say a survey that you're using, you just can't help but to do it. So it's more fluid, but it still has like, it's still systematic, but it's just more fluid, meaning that sometimes you're in the middle of the field, you've already done 10 interviews and suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, this person is saying exactly what the last 10 people have said. And technically that is kind of like a moment of, okay, I'm pulling together some information here. So then there's the question of the chicken or the egg. Does qualitative data analysis emerge from the data collected, or do the ideas from the data come first? And both are true at the same time. Because we have research questions, they're usually based on our experiences, things that we're observing in the classroom, they're based in the literature. There are lots of different reasons why we do the studies that we do and ask the questions that we ask. And so to say that analysis is purely from the data would not be a true representation. We are coming into it having read things like, you know, concepts from the literature, and so we sort of see them when we read them. So it's not pure. Data reduction is a term used in analysis, in qual analysis, which is how you order and collect your transcribed data. So you would have, if you had interviews, you would transcribe those interviews or have someone transcribe them for you, and then you would take that and figure out how to organize it. So you could either categorize them, like what are some general things, like I'm going to put all of my data from, you know, male participants in one pile and all from my female participants in another pile, and so on. So you might do that, and usually I recommend, and what I practice is many different categories. So I'll do all male, all female, and then I'll do like all people over 20 and all people under 20, or I'll do all the people who grew up in the South and all the people, like, you see what I mean? So you're trying to get at different, like, does age matter? Maybe not. Is it about regional differences? Maybe not. Or maybe so. Is it class? Is it education? Is it this and that? So multiple ways of looking at your data. And then contextualizing strategies are when you're actually trying to just look at the data as a whole, which I also do. So I do both, and most qualitative researchers will do both. First, let me look at everything. What does everybody say, no matter what, and then what is happening sort of by, if I sort them in these different ways. Another step in data reduction is coding, and that one is probably a term that's more familiar to you all about qualitative data analysis. So coding is putting them into categories in the same way that we coded for the quantitative, and we said yes is 1 and no is 0. You're doing a similar thing in qualitative, but you may, like I was saying before, actually turn it into a number, or you may actually code for ideas, concepts. So here, look at the next one. Coming up with codes is about identifying central ideas and concepts. So you might look for words and phrases that keep coming up and they seem to be related. What is this person talking about? Is this an important idea? Can I summarize this with a word or a phrase that would suggest the meaning of this underlying idea? Like if you have a bunch of responses from seniors who are in their last semester at NYU, and you're interviewing them about what is happening, you know, what their next steps are. And one person talks about that they're not sure where they're going to be working, and they go into sort of a story about that and what they've been doing around that. And there's somebody else is a little bit concerned about graduating because their grades had some issues. And then there's another, you know, some other student who talks about sort of like debt from college or whatever. You might decide that, oh, you know, one of the things that sort of ties all these things together is worry. They're worried about different things, but everybody's worried. So that would be a code. Like worry is a code. Among seniors, one of the meaningful things that happens is worry. You might then, once you get deeper into it, realize that, oh, you know, there are different worries, and I want to break that apart further. So I want to have financial worry versus career worry versus personal worry. But worry is still central, okay? So that's what coding is about, central concepts and themes. So another process in coming up with those codes, identifying the central ideas, is also looking for stories, because people use stories to make meaning of things. When somebody's trying to explain something to you, if you ask them a question about their life or about their experiences, very often they'll tell you a story. They'll tell you about when they were a kid and they were in school. So you're asking them about their child and that child's personality, and they'll tell you, like, when she was 10 months old, this is what happened. That's a story. It's a way of trying to get at, like, I want to explain how my child is creative and also rambunctious and also, you know, easygoing. And I could say those things, but people will tell stories. So you look for stories. And then you look for contradictions sometimes. Like, it doesn't say that here, but you also you just look for things that jump out. You look for things that sound significant. Like, the person is so passionate here, this seems like it matters. So why does it matter? So you would make a note of that. So as you code, you might find yourself making interpretations or connections like, oh, interesting, this reminds me of something from XYZ. That's a reflective remark. This is for you. That's you're taking this note as you transcribe field notes or analyze your data. So usually what I do is I call them, this is in data analysis. So I'll have a little notebook, or I'll have like a Word document open where I'm like jumping and writing things down as I think of them, because I don't want to forget it. And some of the programs actually allow you to create memos, which is very nice, because you can just attach it. Like, when I was reading this paragraph, this popped into my mind, which is a nice way for you to help you remember, like, what was I thinking again? Why did I think that was significant? Why did I think that was special or important, or maybe something for me to come back to? You write that in a memo. So in field notes, which is here, oh, I'll take that because that one isn't stapled. So this is an excerpt from my field notebook for this project that I did in Head Start. Just in the same way that you would do interview excerpts, which also these interview excerpts also come from the Head Start study. Let me go ahead and hand that out too. Here you go. Okay. So let's just look at this little brief sort of quoting qualitative data exercise. Using excerpts from semi-structured qualitative interviews with staff members at Head Start, you'll develop codes that represent the data. This is how I had the formal exercise. So you're looking for central ideas and concepts, stories, and themes. So what I had them do was take the interview, and I organized the interview by summarizing answers from a few different participants whose code names are SA1, SA2, and SA4. And what that means is it's a staff administrator, because I had teachers, parents, and staff. So staff administrator 1, staff administrator 2, and staff administrator 4. And each of the questions is on top. Have you taken coursework on promoting family involvement? And then SA1 answered this answer, and person 2 this, and person 3 this. Describe for me the work you do in your position, each person's answer. When you're doing qualitative analysis, if you have multiple qualitative questions, you do want to be able to compare the answers to single questions together, which is one of the benefits of doing it in a program, because it just makes it a lot easier. So if you were doing that, you would take your transcribed interviews, each individual one, upload it into a program. There are lots of different ones. So I won't, and there's some free ones at the library. I think it's Atlas is the one that NYU has, and that you can have for free. You bring in all the transcripts into it, and then you can it will allow you to do this, which I had to do manually in Word, which is like cut and paste. It will do that for you. So you can tell it, pull up everything about, response to question 1, and then you can compare them all. Because what I like to do is, in the process of analyzing, whether I'm analyzing interviews, or here we have my field notebook, and whether I'm analyzing my field notes or my interviews, I always read through everything multiple times, and that is actually like a practice, a recommended practice in qualitative research analysis. You want to read and reread and reread, and really sink into it. Really try to understand, what is this person trying to say. So those readings and rereadings I typically do individually. Read each person's interview individually a few times, probably around 3 times. So the first time I read it, and I try to suspend any impulse to do anything. Highlighting, note-taking. I just white knuckle it, and I'm just going to read and try to understand where this person is coming from. And then the second time I read it, I will allow myself to do things like highlight certain words or phrases that seem to be significant, or that oh, that reminds me of this article that I read, or whatever, and then I would make a note of that, of what exactly why I highlighted it. And then the third time through is when I may begin to have some codes and be like, okay, I think this could be something. I think this could, like, this sounds like worry. Maybe this is about stress. Maybe this is about, I love my job or whatever. And then I would read through all the interviews like this and multiple times and be like, okay, now I have a good feel for what's happening. And then I'm going to look at them across and look at what does everybody say about number one? What does everybody say about number two? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So as you can see, whether you're doing qualitative or quantitative, data analysis is a laborious process. And it takes a lot of love to really kind of get into it. And that's why you want to ask questions that interest you and not do something that is, ridiculous or irrelevant to you, because it really does require you to spend a lot of time and be very careful and thoughtful about now that I have these data, what do they mean? You want them to mean something. It may not mean what you thought, and that's fine. It may mean all negative things, and that's fine, but you want it to mean something. And in order to get to that meaning, you have to be systematic, careful, thoughtful about how you're approaching it. Helpful?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. So as far as the qual, because we did spend a little bit more time on the quant, I just want to point out in my field notes something that I do, which is similar to in the slide on the qualitative where it says
What is DAP program?
Where?
Tour of center and stopping by some classrooms. Everything is bright. Kids look happy. Teachers are engaged. Looks like a really...
Oh, development appropriate.
That's what I thought, but then
Yeah.
you also say... Oh, I got confused with DASPC. Oh,
Right.
and then you wrote what it means also.
Yes.
That's good. That's a good idea to write down what things
Yes. Right. So reflective remarks in analysis is similar to what people, and people have different names for this stuff, so don't get too caught up, but methodological notes. In a field notebook, I write what are called methodological notes, which is so the first day that I'm there, right, I'm walking around with my little notebook. I have this pretty little hardcover journal with orchids on the cover, and I've got my little pen. I'm just walking around taking notes. This is my first day, and she's giving me an orientation, and here's what we do. We tour the center, stop by some classrooms, blah, blah, blah. I'm noticing that the paperwork is posted in English and Spanish, that parents volunteering in the classroom help to keep a low adult child. So, right, I'm just noticing all these things, and suddenly, as I'm through this process of these things that I'm observing and jotting down, I also realize that, you know what, I want to make sure that I interview the volunteer coordinator. I want to make sure that I interview the staff who work with parents and family services, the executive director, and the fatherhood initiative person. Okay, so it's I take a note that has nothing to do with what I'm observing or seeing, but more to do with oh, great, now that I've had this interaction with someone and the person says to me, we have this great fatherhood initiative. Oh, you do? Great. I want to interview that person. That's a methodological note. Or again, what the different codes stand for, because of course, as we know in early childhood, it's the land of, or in education, it's the land of acronyms. So,
So you type these up after you take all the notes?
Mm-hmm. Because typing them is a step in my analysis. So writing them down, I'm just kind of writing them down. But then when I come home and I have to type them up, then I'm sort of reliving it. It gives me a chance to sort of put myself back into that spot. And in the typing, I'm learning things. I don't know if that works for everyone. Everybody types their field notes, and it's a good idea. Well, not everybody. Some people literally cut them up into strips. But anyway, I think that some secondary process where you have to revisit your field notes is always a really positive thing to do, because it makes you relive it, but it makes you relive it. And sometimes in reliving it, you remember things that you didn't write down the first time. Because when you're in the moment, maybe you're going too quickly, but reading it, you're wow, I really have a clear picture. I have a very fresh recollection of the situation, and I remember now that there was a kid pulling on my skirt at the time. And so I may make a note of that. Okay?